This is a direct quote from the Anxiety and Depression Association of America. Anxiety disorders are the most common mental illness in the US, affecting 40 million adults, 19.1% of the population, ages 18 and older, every year. In this video, I want to share one very simple concept that I discovered that has all but eliminated anxiety from my life that I think you're going to find tremendously useful. Let's dive deep together. It's time for Real Talk. Anxiety. This big, giant, scary word that means different things to different people. Before we dive too far into this concept and what I've been able to do to all but eliminate anxiety from my life, I want to make a brief disclaimer. This is my personal story, my personal experience. I cannot say that you trying this concept and implementing it in your life is going to create the exact same results. I am not a medical practitioner, and if you are dealing with anything around anxiety and depression, I would highly encourage you to seek professional help. Although this concept has worked for countless others, your situation and who you are is unique, and you don't need to be taking a YouTube video as the gospel for you specifically as an individual. If you are dealing with very real potential medical implications, please seek professional help. So let's start by defining the type of anxiety that I'm referencing here. When it comes to generalized anxiety, all of us have felt anxiety to varying degrees at different times. Most often it's because we're dreading something that's about to happen. We've got a job interview and ask the guy or the girl out on a date. We've got a kid coming, some bad news. We've got this fear of what could happen to a loved one, or the economy, finances. There's so many things that create this tension inside of us. The frame that we're looking at anxiety through today is this general anxiety that we feel on a day-to-day basis. Sometimes we don't really know where it comes from, but we are emotionally triggered in different circumstances and situations, and we just feel this tension. Some people wake up with it first thing in the morning. They just feel stressed and overwhelmed. Some people go to bed dealing with it and they can't turn it off, and they have incredible challenges around falling asleep. But this one simple concept that I want to share with you today, it ties to being present. Now, I recently made a TikTok video on this, and I wanted to elaborate on this concept a bit more because it can be very challenging and context is incredibly important. Your story and your situation is entirely unique to you. But the beautiful thing is that we are all constantly in a state of discovery, and there are certain things that work for certain people that you can duplicate. You can create similar results in your life. And when we talk about being present, I want to anchor in how we can actually start to eliminate the vast majority of anxiety in our lives. First, we need to look at what really causes this general anxiety. It's one very simple thing. These stories that we make up in our head about the past or about the future. If we think about how we feel anxious about the future, most often what is happening in that moment is we are painting a picture in our minds about a future that doesn't exist yet and what we're anticipating is going to happen. This is where worry, fear, that anxiety, all these things come from. And what we're doing is we're living in our minds in the future, trying to mitigate all of the potential things that could happen. And because of that, we are drawing emotion from the future, which doesn't exist, into our present reality. Now, our present reality then becomes tense. We feel this tension, and it has nothing to do with what we're currently experiencing. It has everything to do with this projection in our mind. Our imaginations are causing us to come up with this story about what ifs. What could happen if I lose my job? What happens if my wife doesn't make it home? What happens if the economy tanks? What if, what if, what if? And we start crafting these stories in our heads, trying to anticipate a future that we have no way of fully understanding or knowing. We are trying desperately to control an outcome or to shield ourselves and protect ourselves from things that we don't want to have happen. When we do that, we draw this negative emotion. We pull it into our present reality, making our present reality tense. The opposite side is also true. We do the same thing with things that happened in the past, even yesterday. This is where guilt and shame and regret. We draw emotion from the past. Something happened to us, or we did something. There are situations that in our memory we can go back to and we almost relive these things emotionally, oftentimes because it was a somewhat traumatic experience. Whether it happened to you or you were the cause of it, we are pulling emotion from time that does not exist into our present reality, making our present reality tense. A brief little example of this: if you are worried about the economy right now, it is 2022. There's been a lot of things that have happened. We've gone through COVID, all the craziness around the world, everything going on with Ukraine. There are so many social issues, so many political issues, religious issues. There's so many things that if you turn on the news, or even if you're scrolling through social media, there's a lot of things that we could feel anxious about. You get to decide. You get to decide if you want to take on that anxiety, or if you want to release it and let it go. And this is the anchor for the concept of what we're talking about today. We all have this tendency of living in the past or the future in our heads. And that's all that it is, instead of anchoring to the present moment and being exactly where we are. This doesn't mean we don't dream and plan and be intentional with the future that we're creating. And it doesn't mean that we don't ever look at the past and we learn from mistakes. We grow and we expand. History can teach us some incredibly useful and valuable things. But the difference in these two is whether or not we're actually tapping into the emotion from the past or the emotion from the future and bringing it into our present reality. This again is that anxiety that comes up, this tension. Sometimes we feel nonstop and we really don't know where it's coming from. Now, whether you can identify where it's coming from or not, the simplicity is anchoring into the present moment, this moment right now. So how can we actually take this concept and apply it to our lives on a daily basis? When I first started to try, which it was hard, to try to anchor into the present moment, into my reality, and to really start to question things. There's a very simple concept that I learned from Byron Katie in a book called Loving What Is. I'll link it below. The process that she takes you through is a systematic series of questions. And the first question you ask yourself is, when you're feeling an emotion, when you have a thought, is answering the question, is this true? The second question is, can you be absolutely certain that it's true? If there's any possibility that it's not true, the next question is, how do I react when I believe this thought? And typically our reactions are because we're living in non-existent time, living in the future or the past. And so the reaction is that we kind of go inward, we get reflective, we feel tense, we feel anxious, we're short with other people, we can be angry and temperamental. There are so many different things that come. That's how we tend to react. But then the next question is my favorite. She asked the question, who would you be without this thought? Who would you be without this feeling? You can start to every single day using one of these simple practices, whether it's journaling or mindfulness or meditation or prayer or breathing exercises. For me, all that I did, I started practicing, and it took weeks and weeks and weeks. When I was feeling anxious, I would just stop and I would breathe for about 60 seconds, and I would repeat this over and over and over. In this moment, I'm okay. In this moment, I'm okay. And when you can do that and you can bring down yourself to, just like we do with kids when the work does, like, take a deep breath, take a deep breath, and in this moment, okay, start to realize that despite all the chaos and everything that's going on around us, those things do not have to directly affect our emotional state. It doesn't mean you're not going to still feel things. You're going to have these things come knocking at your door on a regular basis. And just because you struggle through them and things don't feel like they're working, the reason that we often create even more tension and anxiety in our lives is because we're resistant to it. Rather than recognizing, now I'm aware that I'm feeling this anxiety. I don't know where it's coming from. I don't know what the cause is, but I'm going to pause. I'm going to take 60 seconds and I'm just going to tell myself, in this moment, I'm okay. Because if you can be okay, you can create a life where even in the worst of storms, everything that is going on around you does not affect or dominate your emotional state. Now, this is something that again takes consistency and practice, but it is a slow, progressive journey, and it is not something that you can master overnight. So what I would encourage you to do is, starting today, put a reminder on your phone, whatever time you feel like is adequate. Maybe it's at lunchtime or mid-afternoon. And the only thing that you put on the phone is a very simple reminder that says, be present in this moment. Be present in this moment. And then if you need to escape to the bathroom, or you got to go grab a drink from the water cooler, or next time you're on a drive, or you got to separate yourself from the kids for a minute, understand that in that moment, if you simply breathe, anchor into your reality, in this moment, I'm okay. And then you go through those list of questions. Is this true? Can I be absolutely certain that this is true? How do I react when I feel this tension, this anxiety? And for me, I started to realize that it was a form and version of myself that I didn't want to be. And so I was able to answer that final question, who would I be without this thought? And I was able to transition my state and to become the man that I wanted to be, to step back in that moment and to recognize that, yeah, I'm feeling this anxiety, but who would I be without the thought? Who would I be without this feeling? And what you find is that when these feelings and thoughts come and they grab a hold of you, most often the reason they don't let go is because you fight them. But if you surrender to what is, the reality of what is, you'll find that these things just quickly let you go. They come in for a moment. Offense, anger, pain, irritation, whatever it is, these things that cause us to feel anxious, you will have the power to allow them to come in for a moment, and you surrender and say, you know what? I'm going to love what is, and I'm going to anchor into the present moment. In this moment, I'm okay. When you do that and you answer the question, who would I be without this thought? You start to realize that you have just as much power to release those things and to let them go because you're surrendered to what is. I hope you found this useful. If you have additional thoughts, questions, or you agree or disagree, let me know in the comments, because I'd love to create a conversation around this. The whole reason that Real Talk exists is because I want to dive deeper into the subjects, the challenging subjects that we face on a day-to-day basis in life and business that you really can't cover in a reel or a TikTok. Thank you for being here. Be blessed and never stop becoming.